The last thing that we're going to do this week is we're going to now do some importing of images. So we're going to bring in some stuff from Photoshop and from Illustrator now to InDesign just to show you how the workflow could be. So I already have this image in Photoshop. It's a stock photo that I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that it's ready to go to print. So for the first assignment you guys are doing, this is not necessarily a big thing because I just have you guys practicing, making a text box and bringing images in and embedding them. But just for good measure, we're going to do this the right way. So right now it's in RGB, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to convert it to CMYK. Alright, and then I'm just going to double check image size to make sure my DPI is 300. Now this is plenty big. I knew it would be, it was a stock image. Alright, so this is now ready to go into InDesign. So what you want to do is anything that's out of Photoshop, you always want to make sure that you save the file first and then import it into InDesign. You don't want to just click and drag it over into InDesign because sometimes the links will be missing and things just happen. So if you're new to InDesign, just kind of learn from this workflow. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to do a file save as, and we still have file types and things to go over next week, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save this to my desktop. I'm going to leave it as a JPEG. I mean, we could change it to Photoshop or TIFF, which would be really high resolution, but just for demo this week, JPEG's fine. And I'm going to just replace it because all I did was go in and change the color on it. Okay, I'm going to leave it the highest resolution. Okay, so now I'm going to go into my InDesign file that we just had up together, and there's a couple of ways to do this. So you can do a file place, or you can just hit Command D. I'm all about shortcuts. So what I'm going to do is Command D, and I'm going to go ahead to my desktop and find that photo and hit open. So there's a couple of different things to pay attention to while I have this little image on my clipboard. I'm going to zoom out. If you click it directly to your page, it's going to come in 100% of the size that it was in Photoshop. What does that mean? It means that this is the largest this image should ever be in your document. So if you click on your background and you have an image that's only about this big and then you blow it up to be much bigger, it's going to be really low quality. Alright, so I'm going to go back again. I just hit Command Z. So what I'm also, let's try another way. So if I click on it, we know this is the maximum size that it can be, right? Just Command Z. So if you click and drag, it'll put it in a box that's in proportion to the image. Okay, what does that mean? So there's a couple of things to know about placing images from Photoshop and InDesign, and it's a little tricky when you first start doing it, and I'll reiterate it next week as well, because it's one of the hardest concepts for some reason in InDesign, is when you're dealing with the black arrow tool in your image, you're dealing with the frame that the image is in. So notice the selection is blue. If you have the white arrow tool, the direct select, and you click on your image, notice that it changes. Now you're dealing with the image inside it, so I can move it and you can see that it's now not really inside the box, it's kind of going off to the side. Now, things that you might not have noticed. With the black arrow tool selected, it says 100% up here in your control panel. It's always going to say 100% because you're just dealing with a frame or that cookie cutter, right? But when you're dealing with the inside or the direct select tool, it tells you that the image is 50% of its original size, which is fine because we know this is high res and we just saved it out of Photoshop. But the issue is only going to be, and it's not so much the first week, but moving forward, when it's like 300 or 400% and it's really, really blown out, it's not going to print right. And you'll see as we move forward with this. But let's go ahead and check out our links panel. So now that we have the white arrow and selecting our image, you can see under the links all the properties that we just double checked. We know it's a JPEG, we know it's CMYK, we know it's 300 DPI. Those are all really important things to know about print. Okay, something else that we're going to be doing just for the first week is I want you guys to know how to embed an image into a document. What does this mean? That means if I send this file to you, the image will be on the page. Now in InDesign, if you don't embed the file into the document or do something called a package, which we'll cover week 2, then the images will be missing when I open it. So just for this first week, what you're going to do is you're going to go to your links and you're just going to right click and embed it. And now you see this little icon that shows up. That means that this file is here. It's going to make it a little bit bigger, the file size, but that's okay for now. But you just want to know how to embed images in a document just in case. So let's just say you were done with this, you were sending it yourself at home. Now you know the image is here without having to do a whole package. Okay, so again, in your links, if you right click and you embed it, the little icon shows up. Okay, so now we have an image in here. We know how to bring stuff in from Photoshop. So let's go to Illustrator. So you don't necessarily have to just do this from Illustrator. You can draw things with the pen tool in InDesign if you want, but I kind of have these little fat cat drawings, so I'm going to bring them in. So again, in Illustrator you're dealing with points, so you can see the points instead of the little squares of color. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it. So Command C or Edit Copy. And now I'm going to go into InDesign and I'm going to do Edit Paste. Okay, so you might notice there's a couple of things going on here. It's not in my links palette. Why is that? Well, that's because InDesign and Illustrator are a vector-based layout program, and that means you can share files easily back and forth. So this is actually points. So if I zoom in on this cat, it looks just like Illustrator. You can change the color, double click that foreground swatch, now we have a pink cat. So any edits that you can do in Illustrator for the most part we can do in InDesign, and it doesn't need to be in the links panel because we just copied it and pasted it directly from Illustrator. Okay, so if you want to scale it, it works the same way. So you want to make sure that when you're scaling images, you don't do stuff like that. Okay, how to make sure that doesn't happen in InDesign is just hold Shift if you're scaling a vector image, and it's always going to keep it in proportion. Now if you're dealing with an actual image from Photoshop, you're going to hold Shift and Command, and then it'll keep it in proportion to the box that you're scaling. If you don't hold Shift Command, this is what happens. It cuts off your image. So remember, bitmap images, Shift Command. I believe you can do the same with Illustrator. Shift Command, it's always going to keep it in proportion. Okay, so we've done placing images, so now we're ready to save it. So just for this first week, what you're going to do is you're just going to do a file, save or save as, and I'm going to name mine Demo Lecture 1 and save it to my desktop. Now, the default is going to be the CC document. Okay, if you're working on an older version, that's what an IDML file is. So in InDesign, if the top option, the CC document, is going to give me something called an INDD file, which is just a native InDesign file. But if it's an older file, that's what an IDML is. So if I needed to give this file to you and you were working on CS6, I would save it as an IDML file. Now, I think for most of you guys this won't be an issue, but just so you know the differences if it happens. Okay, so I'm going to save this to my desktop. I have so much stuff open for lecture. And now you can see that my little InDesign file is here. On a Mac, this is what it'll always look like. Okay, next up we're going to go over the assignment.